What is going on? Thank you for tuning in to the MMA Podcast 168. It is May 11th, 2016. A lot of talk about, of course, this past weekend. A very fun card in the Netherlands. We saw Alistair Overeem maybe stake his claim for a title shot against Andrei Arlovski. Stefan Struve and Gunnar Nelson, big winners as well. We'll talk about that fight. Talk about the week in MMA news. Of course, this news about is the UFC selling Arzufa and the Fertitta still going to own it. We'll talk a little bit about that. And, of course, this weekend, Bellator 154 and UFC 198 down in Brazil. Going to talk a little bit about both those cards. Thanks for tuning in. Let's do it.
You're listening to the MMA Podcast.
That's right. It is the MMA Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. A beautiful May day here in Florida and over on the West Coast in California. We have the co-host of the show. He is loved and adored all across the U.S. from coast to coast. Pardon me. He's on Twitter at Sweet Pappy Jones. It's P Money. What's going on, man?
Jake, you were too kind to me, my good sir. It is a lovely Wednesday here. Looking forward to breaking down this UFC Rotterdam card. As you mentioned, UFC made a good showing for itself in its first card in the Netherlands, and some good fight news to talk about as well. And always a pleasure chopping it up with one of the best in the game, Jake 20 Wing Walters.
And as always, you can follow the MMA Podcast on Twitter. Pardon me if I have a little tickle in my throat there. I think this sinus gunk is floating around. Follow the MMA Podcast on Twitter. If you're listening live right now on Wednesday night, you can call in 213-457-3380 or Skype us at the MMA Podcast or tweet us. I try and leave the Twitter up so I can read comments during shows. And you can always visit the MMApodcast.com. Click the links at the top to subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube, all for free.
Free 99.
The low. All right, I guess we'll start like we usually do. This past weekend, UFC Rotterdam. That was a fun card, man. It went down on a Sunday afternoon, morning. I know it was Mother's Day for a lot of people, but were you able to catch it, or were you caught up with Mother's Day obligations? Luckily, my mom lives in Costa Rica, which I love you, Mom. I really didn't have to do anything but send out a phone call, and I was good. You know, I literally can't send flowers there, so I don't have the burden of that. Just got to be good for a phone call, and I was set. But did you get stuck with Mother's Day obligations over in the desert there in Cali?
Oh, well, I would never say stuck with it, Jake. I did have some Mother's Day fun to attend to, so yeah, that left me unable to catch the card live. But I was able to go back and rewatch it, and yeah, it was a fun card. Really, some solid prelims and all the way through the main card. A great showing for the UFC's first card in the Netherlands.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of local fighters do very well, and we'll get to that. Sort of like we sorted it out last week. I sort of want to do all the fights in a bunch, and then the top three on their own. The fights that were won by Nelson, Struve, and Overeem. I had just a couple notes here. I took Hustam Kabalov looking like a killer against Chris Wade. Kyoji Horiguchi looking like the elite flyweight he is. He's obviously a top 5 guy. And whenever Mighty Mouse does leave the division, because he's only good for another 2 or 3 title defenses where really there's no other option but to bump him up. You know, you can't leave him there forever. I think you let him maybe tie or eclipse Silva's record of 10. But I don't know. You just can't keep him there forever. Horiguchi's young, and he is one of the guys who I look to carry the torch on whenever Johnson leaves. I guess I'll get up in the main card, too. Carolina Kowalkiewicz looking very good against Heather Jo Clark in all senses of the word. Nikita Krylov, dude, he's looking skinnier and thinner every fight. I believe he started at heavyweight. He had that fight against Soa Palele, which I was talking with the Jew, Ross Finkelstein, a few days ago. Both of us agree that Soa Palele versus Nikita Krylov, probably the worst fight in UFC history. Just two out-of-shape gas dudes laying on one another, throwing punches that you could get from your 4-year-old niece when y'all are playing. I mean, just the most embarrassing thing. But Krylov looking good, getting a second-round rear naked choke. And Germaine de Randamie, I think that's a name you're going to hear more and more often. Fighting in her home country against Anna Olmos. First-round TKO. We really don't talk about Germaine de Randamie a lot. I think she's the real deal, man. Another chat I was having with Ross, I guess, after this card went down. That's a fighter who, I mean, you match her up against top talent, and I could see her giving Cyborg big issues. I could see her giving Holly Holm big issues. I could see her giving Miesha Tate, Amanda Nunes, Ronda Rousey big issues. I mean, this is a top elite, easily top 10, maybe even top 5 talent that once she gets bumped up the ladder and starts fighting some higher caliber opponents, keep your eye on Germaine de Randamie. I mean, I don't want to say potential future UFC champ yet, but, man, if she keeps fighting the way she's been fighting, she looks incredibly impressive in there.
Yeah, de Randamie, she's really, she came into the UFC certainly with the kickboxing background and the high-level credentials in that aspect of the sport. Did have a little slip-up when she first got into the UFC. I want to say she also had some inactivity, potentially due to injury or something like that. But, yeah, certainly. This was her first fight in 14 months, I want to say, and hadn't fought since her loss to Amanda Nunes. Her only blemish in the UFC. She is 3-1 aside from that fight. But yeah, she does have those very high level kickboxing credentials, and yeah, if she's able to get some sort of consistency going, because she first fought for the UFC back in 2013, and she's only had 4 fights since then. And if she can just stay active, stay healthy, maybe she can get on a roll and do some big things. But yeah, like you mentioned, that card overall, Krylov just looking amazing versus Barroso. Habilov as well, just looking like a beast. So many fantastic finishes on this card all the way around. Horiguchi, as you mentioned, just with that speed, that accuracy, his karate styling, looking excellent. Definitely great action all the way around from the prelims to the beginning of the main card.
And that brings us to the Gunnar Nelson fight, which was as intriguing and as tangled as the preview was. Both of these guys had a lot of tools in the toolbox. You don't know what's exactly going to happen. It was a very lots of layers to previewing the fight. The fight itself, however, was very basic. Both rounds, Gunnar Nelson shot, Gunnar Nelson scored, Gunnar Nelson took his opponent down, and Gunnar Nelson did not let that motherfucker up. And Albert Tumanov struggled mightily to get any air. I mean, just this suffocating Gunnar Nelson, who you look at his physique between this fight and his last fight, a loss to Damian Maia. The guy's put on a lot of muscle. The guy just looked like an absolute killer. I think I I would love to see a rematch between this Gunnar Nelson and a Damian Maia. I think Maia maybe still wins, but not as one-sidedly as he did when they fought before. This is a scary Gunnar Nelson, man. I think these are both two fighters. I'll stick to what I said last week about both of these guys being very underrated, and this being probably, I would say, is the most underrated fight of 2016 so far, just because neither guy gets their due, especially Tumenov. And I still stand by, man, putting together a 5-fight win streak in the UFC is not easy, and this is a guy I expect to do it again. I mean, he's got all the natural talent, is young. I think both of these fighters, Nelson and Tumenov, are both going to have very long, prosperous careers. Both of them young and just absolute killers at welterweight. And Sunday, Gunnar Nelson was the better man, and the way he fought, I don't think this is a matchup where both of them win 5. It's even. Gunnar Nelson showed mastery, almost finished it in the first round, finished it in the second round. This is a Gunnar Nelson, I think, who could do exactly what he did to Tumenov. He could do that to 90 to 95% of the welterweights in the world. And once you start getting in that top 10 category, gets a little, I don't know if you're going to be able to pull that shit against a guy like a Maia or, whomever. But, man, Gunnar Nelson looking impressive as hell. And I can't wait to see who he fights next. I'm sort of intrigued seeing just how well Gunnar Nelson has bounced back, how different he looks, and the guy's an absolute killer.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was a fight that really demonstrated. I mean, Jake, I've been on high on Gunnar Nelson for some time, and those fans listening who've been keeping track over the years, they'll know I've been siding with Gunny in most of his matches. And really, as you mentioned, Tumenov, certainly no slouch whatsoever. A 5-fight win streak in the UFC, it doesn't matter. I mean, just the competition you're facing is one thing, but then just actually stringing those wins together, I mean, it's like a baseball team, for example. There are certain games they're quote unquote supposed to win, and sometimes you go in there, they got the better matchup, and sometimes they just don't show up that day, and they get beat by the team that they quote unquote should have beaten. And there are instances of that in the fight game where you'll have a fighter go in and they should have beaten this guy, but anyways, maybe they took him lightly, and they end up getting defeated. But Tumenov has been consistent, and he's been consistently crushing people. Great striking arsenal. But Gunnar Nelson, he is just phenomenal. He has, as we saw, I mean, the first 10 seconds of that fight, he cracked Albert Tumenov with I want to say it was a left hook, just so perfect within the first couple seconds of the fight, and really displaying some of his excellent striking skills to go with his great ground acumen. I think really the only thing, as you mentioned, Jake, there are certain guys we saw, for example, in the Rick Story fight. Rick Story, he's got the strong wrestling background, able to keep it on the feet, and he was able to take I want to say it was a split decision from Gunnar Nelson. Just Rick Story, just with his boxing style, was able to put the pressure on, was able to put the combos together. Gunnar Nelson, he's a guy, he likes to play with the distance. I hate to say Machida style. Everybody likes to make the Machida comparison, but it's the karate style. He gets in, he gets out, and he gets in and out with very accurate strikes. We saw that. It set up his ground game versus Albert Tumenov, which also the devastating, oh my goodness, those elbows. He's shown that before in other fights as well. Once he gets on top, starts laying down some very, very heavy elbows. And it was just a beautiful display all the way around. Both guys have a lot of upside. I definitely think Gunnar has a little more upside as well. Definitely still a relatively young fighter too. So can't wait to see where he goes after this big win.
And talking about one-sided fights, we go from that fight to the co-main event. where there's not really that much to say about a fight that goes 15 seconds. Silva wanted to clinch. Struve peppers him with a couple shots. Silva tries to clinch again, tries to drive Struve backwards into the cage. Struve lands a knee to the chest / midsection of Bigfoot, who slumps over while Struve just pours on the elbows to the back or to the side of the head. That leaves Leon Roberts rushing out to break it up. The Rotterdam crowd goes nuts for the big Dutchman as he, what a brutal finish. Bigfoot Silva, is that the end of him? He is, I think, 1-5-1 in his last 7 fights. He was one of the guys who was famously on the TRT and had to pull off it. I don't know if he still gets medical exemption or not, but the guy, has definitely looked like a shadow of the guy who was earning title shots and looking slick in a past age. 1-5-1 is not a good look. What'd you think about Stefan Struve? I mean, he had all that time off because of the heart issue. Now he's won 2 of his last 3. He's finally getting back in the win column. He's still young. He's 28. The 7-foot Dutchman. What do you think about the fight and maybe who next for him? I'm looking at the heavyweight rankings. That puts Struve 13th. He was previously unranked. Actually, that's the same exact scenario as Gunnar Nelson, who's also 13th at welterweight now, having previously not been ranked. Man, I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities ahead for Stefan Struve. He's fought a lot of the top guys, so maybe someone like Ruslan Magomedov, another up-and-coming heavyweight. What do you think about this fight, P-Money?
Well, I think this might be the only Stefan Struve fight I've accurately predicted, and like all of them, I've never been quite sure. I was very uncertain making this pick. You never know with Bigfoot. Large guy, solid ground game, gigantic fists with literally very heavy hands. But Stefan Struve, man, one of the things I always knocked him for was being 7 feet tall and letting people get inside on him. And in this fight, it was, like you said, it was 15 seconds, because that's about how long it took for Silva to close the gap on Stefan Struve. And as soon as Bigfoot got close, Struve jacked that chin with a big punch, threw a couple uppercuts. I want to say it was like a hook he hit him with first, then followed up. I don't know if any of the uppercuts landed cleanly, but certainly then that big knee. And he just really was able to use those long limbs and the best he could and very quickly. It was a great showing. And then the leverage being generated from what I would like to call the Travis Brown style elbow to the side of the head of the opponent who's taking you down. He really is one of the guys who started doing that most effectively. And he has a similar frame at 6'7" to Stefan Struve, but of course, Struve just being a little bit longer, he was able to use that to a similarly devastating effect. Man, it was a good, it was a great performance from Stefan Struve. Probably the best he's ever looked in the UFC, actually. Whether or not that's the caliber of the opponent, as you mentioned, Bigfoot, he had been on a bit of a decline. This is not the same Antonio Silva that beat Fedor famously back in the Strikeforce days. He has seen better days. I want to say his last fight before this was getting knocked out by Mark Hunt in their rematch. It just has not been the best of times as of late for Bigfoot. So whether or not Struve looks good just due to any improvements he made or just the level of opponent he was fighting, I think that will remain to be seen with his next fight. But I think Struve certainly did an excellent job. This was a picture-perfect game plan for the opponent he was fighting, and it worked to a T in front of his home country crowd.
Speaking about good game plans in front of his home country's crowd, that's a perfect segue to the main event. Alistair Overeem Man, just I saw a lot of mixed things on Twitter when it went down, but I personally found it to be a great performance by Overeem. Maybe not as aggressive as he's been in fights past, but you can tell training with Jackson and Winklejohn has helped out a lot. He's a lot more patient a fighter. He won the first round, and then in the second round lands a front kick, follows it up with a left hook. That leaves Andrei Arlovsky slumping to the canvas as Mark Goddard rushes in to save him. I believe, what was the official time? 1:12 into the second round. So it only took the Reem about 6 minutes to finish a guy in Andrei Arlovsky, who himself has been successful lately in the UFC. I think... I don't know. Let's talk about the fight itself first before we start talking about the heavyweight title picture. But man, well, what did you think when you went back and watched the Reem? Just this is an Arlovsky who's put forth some really incredible fights. The one against Brown pops in my mind first because I was there live, but the guy has stood and traded and taken a lot of damage, given out a lot of damage, and Reem just seemed to neutralize him, and then he lands that kick hook combo, and before you really could even blink, the fight was over.
Yeah, that was a great heavyweight fight. Those are the kind of heavyweight fights I love to see. Arlovsky came out. I thought Arlovsky had a great chance in this fight, and he started off first 10 seconds, came out guns a-blazing, had Overeem pinned against the cage, was throwing great combinations, although Overeem, to his credit, was really defending well. Arlovsky started opening up to the body and eventually backed off and decided, hey, this is technically a 5-round fight. He let off the gas a bit there, and it did not go so well for the rest of the fight. Overeem really put together a beautiful game plan. He was staying on the outside, really using his technical kickboxing abilities. Great leg kicks, going everywhere to the body, to the legs, and using his great punching accuracy as well. And since he's been in both of them, really, since they've been with Jackson Winklejohn, just revitalized careers for the both of them. And Overeem just happened to get the better of it with this one. I mean, this was, as you mentioned, Jake, the Karate Kid style jumping kick to the face, although you would have liked to connect with the heel of the foot on that one. He jump kicked him, and I'm surprised he didn't put his big toe in through Arlovsky's mouth or something like that and just pierced his jaw with that, because he actually dislocated his toe with that kick. It was just amazing. Somehow, I think mostly just due to the fact that it connected on the toes. Arlovsky was a little bit stunned, but he wasn't knocked out. And then that left hook came from Overeem. Thing of beauty. Arlovsky falls down, turtles up, and Arlovsky rains the shots to get the stoppage, also in front of his home country. Great performance, yeah. And as you mentioned, I mean, my goodness, this certainly puts him in the thick of the title hunt. Overeem was coming from, as we were talking about just a little bit ago, fights he should have won. He dropped a few of those. The fight with Ben Rothwell, for example, that one certainly stands out. That's one I know. I'm pretty sure we all thought that Overeem was going to handily win that fight. But he's back on the right track. Want to say has 3 wins in a row now, and he's in the mix, as Dana White would say.
So straight up now, do you give Reem the title shot next after we get this weekend's heavyweight fight between Fabricio Verdum and Stipe Miocic?
Well, that really is. That's a great question, because we have Kane fighting Travis Brown here coming up pretty soon. So, of course, I know the UFC would love to put Kane back in the title picture, depending on certainly depending on who comes up victorious in the Stipe Miocic Fabricio Verdum fight. But yeah, Overeem, he's thrown himself right in that picture, and hey, who knows? It really depends on what happens. Let's say Miocic beats Verdum, and they want to set up an instant rematch or something like that. Well, hey, then you could do Kane versus Overeem. The fans have never seen that, and that would be an excellent fight. Um, Man, it's really a tough one. I think a lot of it hinges on the Kane Velasquez Travis Brown fight. If I want to say if Travis Brown beats Kane, I think Overeem gets inserted as the next contender for the heavyweight belt, no doubt.
Honestly, I say for the sake of parity, if Kane gets the win, make him fight again, because just there's been too much Kane at the top. We need a little breather from the Kane era. Make him fight one more fight. Make him fight Rothwell or something. And I would give it to Reem. This is a guy who you want to say has fought for UFC gold before, and he really hasn't. So give him a title fight. You know, he's a historically relevant guy, and having him fight for the UFC belt, I think, is a good look. And I guess that does it for UFC Rotterdam. Our boy JF757 tweeted me a picture, which is actually the picture I sort of alluded to when I was talking about the Gunnar Nelson fight, just where he looks just like a string bean in the first one, and it says before, and it's when he's getting checked by the commission ringside before the Damian Maia fight, and then after he's lost the mop top, he has a shaved head, but more noticingly, he's turned from a sort of really skinny looking guy to this dude's got a six pack, has, you know, is muscly, is built. And I think that if you're a grappler, you really need you know, not just a you know, encyclopedic knowledge of grappling, but you know, you've got to have strength to go with it. And now that we have a jacked looking Gunnar Nelson, I'm excited to see how well he does. I believe that does it for UFC Rotterdam. So let's get straight to the news. All right. What's the first bit of news we got? Actually, I want to talk to you a little bit about last weekend's cards. Did you catch Canelo versus Khan, Saul Alvarez versus Amir Khan, the boxing fight?
You know what? Unfortunately, I was working for that one. I did not get to catch that live, but I did get to see the highlight. I did get to catch that.
So he knocks him out cold. Apparently, we might see Canelo versus GGG, Gennady Golovkin, which would be a very fun fight. If real quickly, I don't want to muddy up this show with boxing, but who you got in a potential matchup between Canelo and Gennady Golovkin?
Oh man, well, really, I'm not. I'm a casual boxing fan. I've watched a few of Canelo's fights. Have watched a couple of Gennady's fights, but I can't really call it from. I mean, at least to what I know, they do kind of have similar styles. Both actually like to trade, or at least will stand in the pocket and trade. Yeah, I can't really call it though. I don't really have a dog in that fight, I'd say.
Yeah, and some news briefs we'll go over before we get to the stuff to discuss this week. One Championship 41 was this past weekend, and if you didn't catch it, a very impressive fight is the main event. Their inaugural strawweight championship between Angela Lee and Mei Yamaguchi. Lee was a huge favorite, the 19-year-old star over there. Huge favorite. The fight went. It was a lot closer than a lot of people thought. Back and forth. Lee ended up winning though. The first women's strawweight champion over there. What else? Oh yeah. I made a little note by Canelo that I thought Golovkin will absolutely destroy Canelo if they ever fight. The Fertitas apparently trying to sell the UFC. I would discuss this, but I feel like there's not really anything to discuss. Rumors were floating around that maybe the UFC was going to sell the entire business for $4 billion. I think that would, I guess the only thing to talk about is, do you think the sport would be better off or worse off? And I think, I have a lot of gripes with Zuffa, the Fertitas, White. I think unless they're selling it to really competent people, I think it'd be easy to drive the UFC into the ground. I think White, I call him out for being an idiot, and then he does a lot of idiotic things. But I don't know. He's done a decent job at bringing up the UFC, making them the guys. Like the NFL is the place to come and watch football. Although you have groups like Bellator, ONE FC, who in the last few years have taken more market share. I don't know. I'm sort of conflicted. Part of me wants to see the UFC sell to better ownership, but I wonder if better ownership is out there. Do you want to see the UFC get sold?
I've actually kind of been debating about that just to myself, as the rumors have really been kicked up. I mean, I know we heard rumblings of ESPN potentially being interested a couple weeks, maybe a month or so ago. But yeah, that's certainly that talk has ramped up quite a bit as of late. And really, I mean, I feel like yes, we've both questioned a lot of the moves that Zuffa has made as of late. But really, they have brought the sport to where it is, and we know that for no other reason. They want to keep the sport alive just because that has been a big breadwinner for them as of late, and they certainly have a vested interest in it. That is the market that they created, and the market that they dominate, and I should say the market that they took over and refined and overhauled and resuscitated and brought to life, and made it viable. So looking at the long term, I mean, they want to grow this into the NFL type of brand. At least that's the kind of talk we heard. If they were to sell to ESPN, and really ESPN, they would love to buy the UFC for $4 billion. I'm sure that's probably what they paid for their NBA rights, and I do not think they have any stake in ownership. Although I'm not 100% sure in that. But that same amount would probably full out buy them the UFC. Whether or not that would be good, that depends. Does ESPN want to take that? Now they could use that as one of their brands. Now they've got the NBA. Now they've got the UFC. They still do some Major League Baseball stuff. Do they want to throw the UFC into that rotation, give them the Saturday night spots for the fight night cards, and really help blow it up and make it what I'd love for it to be, what I think it ultimately should be, is a sport on the same level as MLB, NFL, all that stuff, in the sense that they're aired for free. They are never pay-per-view. The biggest games, the World Series, the Super Bowl, none of it is pay-per-view. And they make tons of dough. They make way more money than the UFC. And if ESPN buys it up, gives them that spot, that Saturday night slot, that very well could lead them to be able to do that, to grow the sport even further, to the next level, to the mainstream. Now, on the other side of the token, they could very easily just buy it to shelve it and say, you know what, ESPN's always kind of been boxing. We've always been about the big sports franchises. We really don't like the UFC. They were slow to embrace it. So I'm not really sure what would be a better move, I guess. Yeah, as I said, I've debated about this for some time, but I really think that Zuffa the Fertitas and Dana White, I mean, I would imagine that they would want to hold on to this business. They have, as far as for their end, for their profit, they've done some good things. They've made some smart predictions about the way media is going, things like that. You know, they're not incompetent businessmen entirely. Um, so I think they want to keep it going. I don't know that it's going to be sold anytime soon.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. You know, it's something I've actually talked about on previous episodes because I don't know. The UFC does end up getting sold in the next 3 to 5 years. I don't know when it'll be. I don't know who it'll be to. You know, weird whisperings of Chinese capital media and whispers now that it might only be a partial sale, sort of like when they sold 10% to Flash Entertainment back a few years ago. I'm not sure, but I think it's the logical thing to do when you found a business and build the business up and you feel like it's reaching its peak, you sell. And I think they are realizing that, and they're businessmen. And the UFC isn't a baby; it's a business. And when the business reaches its peak, you sell. And I don't know. I'm interested to see how that affects things. I think the UFC getting sold would be nothing but good news to organizations like ONE FC and Bellator. But we'll see. We'll see what goes down. Another quick brief, nothing really to discuss. Anderson Silva out of UFC 198. The Uriah Hall fight seems to be canceled. Anderson, I guess, had gallbladder surgery, and if everything went okay, he can be back at it in like 6 weeks. The other Silva, Vanderlei, also apparently rumors have it that he got like hit by a car when he was out riding his bike, and things aren't too serious, but he's also in the hospital. So even though we've had parsed words for Vanderlei in the past, we obviously hope he gets better soon. That brings us to the things to discuss, which we only have a few issues before we get into this weekend's Bellator 154 and UFC 198 cards. Dennis Siver out of UFC 199. That card scheduled for June in LA. BJ Penn is now going to be fighting Cole Miller, and I think Cole Miller is going to be a tougher fight than Siver. I think Cole has a better chance of beating BJ Penn. That said, what's Cole Miller's greatest strength? His jiu-jitsu. I don't think he has better jiu-jitsu than BJ Penn. Penn came into the sport as a jiu-jitsu guy. That's still his base. And I think Cole Miller is going to need to employ some striking from range, which, I mean, shit, man, that's a possibility. And if he wins the fight, that's probably how he's going to win the fight. Penn better not be walking around on the balls of his feet like a damn ostrich. He better, be training with Jackson. And now that things have changed a lot from Siver to Miller, I hope they construct a game plan soon to figure that out, because I think Cole Miller offers some problems, but I'm still taking BJ Penn, of course. What do you think about the opponent switch?
Well, it's great that they were able to get Penn a last minute opponent, especially after all the hype behind him returning. I think Cole Miller is a dangerous stand-in there. Seaver, certainly not a pushover, although BJ Penn seemingly would have an advantage in almost every area of the fight there. Although Seaver is a creative mixed martial artist, Cole Miller has a good height and reach advantage on BJ Penn. And again, does he have the credentials of Penn? No. Does he have the UFC resume of Penn? Certainly not. But this is the whole, I mean, styles make fights, and what does Penn have left in the tank? I mean, my goodness, the last time we saw him fight, it was a bad time. Nobody wanted to see BJ Penn in the ring looking like that. And man, Cole Miller, if he uses his range, I mean, that's one of those things. Again, BJ Penn certainly more decorated on paper. I mean, realistically, with his his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background, I mean, no way he should get finished, right? But Cole Miller, with those limbs being so long, I mean, the leverage that you can create, the different angles you can attack with, just the ability to manipulate your and your opponent's body. It's just a different set of pros and cons with the long limbs. And if he can use those to an advantage, and if BJ Penn is looking like the BJ Penn that came out in his trilogy fight with Frankie Edgar, this fight is certainly winnable for Cole Miller. I would absolutely not put money on this fight, but just having to pick, I mean, I would pick BJ Penn. Of course, you got to still go with him. He's with Greg Jackson. You know, I mean, I don't know. Really, after his last fight, I don't think any of us should be picking Penn, realistically speaking. But you know, he's the legend. He's with Greg Jackson, legendary MMA coach. You know, I think we're all picking with our hearts in this one and saying BJ.
Yeah, I think we're both doing that. We're both guilty of that there. What else? Dillashaw Asunciao slated for UFC 200. First time around, Asunciao got the better of Dillashaw. This time around, I think Dillashaw avenges that loss. You know, TJ, I think, has evolved a little bit more than Asunciao has since. Not saying Asunciao is a bad fighter. I think Dillashaw is right up there with Cruz as being the best at 35, and Asunciao is easily top 5, and maybe has kind of gotten fucked out of a title shot by his inactivity. But it's good that they're giving him a big name fight in Dillashaw at UFC 200. I am taking TJ in this one, though. What about you?
Yeah, this was a very surprising announcement, at least for me. I mean, Asunciao has been on the shelf for so long, and I almost forgot he was even an active fighter. I actually wonder if he was technically an active fighter on the roster. I mean, I want to say after 2 years of inactivity, you drop off, and I would be shocked if Asunciao has fought in the last 2 years. I really don't recall the last match he had. As you mentioned, though, yeah, TJ Dillashaw has improved a ton since their fight. He was really putting it together with Dwayne Ludwig as that fight, the first fight with Asunciao was made, and it was a closely contested fight. But really, he took it to the next level. He just kept ramping it up, and at this point, I think he has what it takes to beat Asunciao. And I think he'll be able to make a successful defense at UFC 200. I was just very shocked at this announcement. Again, not just because I've forgotten about Asunciao as a contender, but just the now 4 title fights on UFC 200. It's going to be an insane card. Certainly well worth the price of admission at this point.
Oops, I believe I was muted up there. Yeah, it's going to be a wild one, man. I was thinking about going, then not going. Now, man, with all of these fights, I'm starting to reconsider. I guess we'll see. Let's see, anything else before? Oh, yeah, Chiesa Ferguson, slated for UFC Rapid City. That'll be July 13th. Honestly, if you live within a day's drive of UFC of Rapid City, South Dakota, just go visit. If you're in Denver, just go fucking visit. It's beautiful there, man. They have Mount Rushmore, Crazy Horse. It's an awesome small city there in South Dakota. I went like a year ago, and it was one of my favorite parts about living in Denver, taking that trip. But let's get to the fight. Michael Chiesa and Tony Ferguson, a fight with lots of title implication at 155. Man, this is close. These are 2 ground experts who are very competent on the feet. I'm taking Michael Chiesa, man. What about you?
Oh my goodness, that is a bold choice. You know, it's really a close match. I kind of thought. I mean, although Chiesa is on a really good tear right now, he's got some great momentum behind him, especially usurping some of the momentum from Beneil Dariush after his great submission victory over him in his last fight. Tony Ferguson, though, man, I don't know. Ferguson is crafty on the ground, and I think he's got a striking advantage in this one. Although Chiesa does look to be tuning up his striking as well. Um, my goodness, this is a tough fight to call. Great fight. I've got to go with Ferguson though. I think Ferguson just he's so vicious, and he's just improved his game so much. He's what, like 10-1 in the UFC at this point. He's got all the momentum in the world. I got to go with El Kukui.
El Kukui. We also had a tweet. Somebody wanted us to revisit last week's topic, where we talked about the Misha Paige Van Zant debacle. Our boy Tim Frontkick tweets in, can y'all talk maybe why most MMA media can draw full conclusions by just having Paige Van Zant's side of the story and Misha just speaking Paige's side? We don't have Ronda's side yet, nor is there audio from what actually happened. Can y'all go over that in a bit? We'll be waiting on the new episodes. I don't know, man. Nothing. Pat, you're a lot more Ronda sympathetic here, so I'll let you lead off. Because, yeah, maybe you wait for the other side, but I don't know, man. It sounded like a pretty, I don't need to hear the other side when the facts are laid out that black and white, that Ronda got mad because Paige said congrats to Holly Holm. That's some outrageous shit.
Well, our boy Tim does bring up a great point, though. I mean, really, this could be an example of two fighters who got together and said, hey, you know what, let's just go around and defame Ronda Rousey or just slander her name for whatever reason. Why would they do that? I don't know. What would the motive be? Could it just, I mean, it seems to me that would only be making money for Ronda Rousey. I don't know why they would possibly do that. But, yeah, certainly it is a possibility. And, you know, I think the main fact is just that the media is a joke these days, and really any aspect you want to talk about, if you're talking about mixed martial arts, sports, or just the mainstream media in general these days. I mean, my goodness, I can name any single mixed martial arts website, some of them that are owned by incredibly large newspaper publications, and the amount of inaccuracies, typos, things like that, it's amazing. I've said many times, if USA Today needs a new editor, your boy really doesn't have anything better to do, and it takes about 5 minutes in a competent reading level to do so. So you know, that's how things like that happen. It's just with the media these days, it's report it first, and then if it's not right, send out that retraction 10 to 20 minutes later after someone else sends out their tweet. Or it's just ridiculous the way things have gotten these days. Although you could argue that at this point, this story has been out. Again, we were talking about this last week. The fact that Ronda Rousey hasn't come out and said, oh, no, this didn't happen, this is what actually happened. Some would say, oh, yeah, that's kind of like an admission that, yeah, that's basically what happened and that's basically what went down. But really, if Ronda Rousey comes out and tells her quote-unquote side of the story, then all we still have is he said, she said. It's really not news, and again, part of it is also just the 24-hour instant quote-unquote news cycle. When you're going a good stretch in between cards, you know, these guys are just trying to drum up clicks for their website and generate ad revenue. So it doesn't even have to be news. It could just be hearsay, and that's what goes these days.
Let's take the high road from that. Let's talk about this weekend's cards. Bellator 154. I'm sorry, I'm only gonna watch one fight. There are a few decent fights on this card. Adam Piccolotti versus Ray Wood, Evangelista Santos against Saad Awad. Aside from that, I'm really only gonna tune in to Phil Davis and Mo Lawal. They're fighting one another And, man, you look at both of these guys' records, and it's almost laughable when you compare their quality of opponent. You have Phil over in the UFC fighting guys like Rashad Evans, Alexander Gustafsson, Glover Teixeira, Ryan Bader, I don't know if I mentioned Rumble, just a ton of fighters. Let me read off, which, yes, King Mo is on a 7-fight win streak. Let me read off those 7 fighters. Dustin Jacoby, Joe Vadipo, Chick Congo, Linton Vassell, Brett McDermott, Theodoros Oxtulis, and Jiri Prochazka. His last 3 fights have been in Risen. So 4 of those, Jacoby Vadepi, Chick Congo, and Linton Vassell all being in Bellator. You look at the only people that Phil has lost to recently, Rumble Johnson and Ryan Bader, I think would absolutely one-sidedly dispatch a King Mo easily. I don't know if Phil has as easy a time as a Rumble Johnson, but I still think this is a very one-sided fight. I haven't seen odds actually on this, but I would assume they're very skewed toward Mr. Wonderful. I think he wins. I don't know. Just wrestle fucks him. I don't know. I don't care. I do care. I will watch, but I don't know. I don't think this is going to be a very close fight.
Yeah, and this is one of those ones. I was checking out the card. It's got 14 fights on it, or it looks like it's got 1 million fights on it, and very few to basically none do I even care about. We got our boy Darren Uyen Oyama deep on the prelims there. Stephanie Frausto, who I want to say is George Gurgel's wife. I could be completely mistaken there. Actually, I think I'm mistaken there. Oh well, it's I'm just not that big. I mean, Bellator is just not doing it for me these days. As you mentioned, Phil Davis versus King Mo. I mean, it just seems like a squash match. King Mo has some heavy hands, and he's got some very solid wrestling credentials. But Phil Davis, as you mentioned, has just been competing on the higher level. He's been facing the tougher opponents and beating tougher opponents in mixed martial arts. Sure, King Mo technically has a win over Gegard Mousasi back in the Strikeforce days, but if you go back and you watch that fight, really, at least to me, I think that's a definitive example of someone who probably should have won a fight from the bottom. I mean, but that's neither here nor there. King Mo is going to get squashed by Phil Davis. I think he's going to come with the pressure, and he's going to beat up King Mo, plain and simple. I think Phil has a decent height and reach on King Mo, and he's going to be able to use it to keep him at his end, and Phil Davis should be able to come through with a nice decision victory, if not maybe late submission.
I actually had a text come through on the personal blower from a unanimous number. I don't know who it was, but they informed me that my attempt to bring down King Mo's record was here. What is it? My attempt to discredit King Mo's resume is dumb. And yes, I will give you that you can't say, oh, well, you didn't beat good enough opponents, because in MMA it's not necessarily the fighter's responsibility to get good opponents, it's the promotions. But let's be honest here. Who has King Mo beat? Ever. Let's talk ever. Yeah, he beat Gegard Mousasi 6 years ago in Strikeforce, and that was, the one fight where, man, that was, the one red spot on Gegard's record, and that gave King Mo a lot of fights. Who has King Mo beat? Every time he rises up and gets a challenge, Emmanuel Newton lost to him twice. Rampage lost, he really hasn't gotten that many tests And yeah, it's a shame he's here fucking his entire career fighting guys like Mike Whitehead and Roger, a Roger Gracie who had just started fighting mixed martial arts, and a Seth Petruzzelli and a Mikhail Zayats in the last 7 bumps he's fought. But I don't know. I really think a very, very, very important part of evolving a fighter and letting him get better is to have quality fights. And that's also why I think Bellator is doing Michael Venom Page no favors by sheltering him from, good fighters. I mean, you only can give a fighter cans for so long before you finally give him a fighter who has a chance to win. And Venom Page at this point has been done no favors by Bellator, who has only lined up can after can after can after can to crush. And yeah, I get King Mo's last 3 fights have been in Risen, but I'll ask this question to any King Mo fan in the world. Who has he beat? And you're not allowed to use fights that are over 6 years old. K-Guard. It's just there are no, like, who is the best fighter he beat? Chick Congo, like an old Chick Congo that the UFC cut because he lost like 4 out of 5 or something. Is it Chick? Is it Seth Petruzzelli, the guy we know for beating Kimbo Slice? It's probably Vassal, Linton Vassal, an underrated Bellator light heavyweight, but let's not get it twisted. Phil Davis is way beyond Linton Vassal, and I think has his way with King Mo quite easily on Saturday, which Bellator knows that King Mo versus Phil Davis isn't the best fight in the world when they're taking the B time slot, just taken the know your role slot of 8 to 10. The UFC pay-per-view kicks off at 10 Eastern, and Bellator just said, fuck it, let's just schedule it for 8 to 10. We're not going to be able to take any viewers away from the UFC. Let's just end it at 10 and be done with it. And we'll be done with that card and move on to UFC 198. A card that, it took a couple lumps, especially recently with that really unfortunate news about Anderson Silva. But it's still going to be a fun card. It's we've got prelims. I guess let's do it like we normally do. Just do the prelims all in a wash. And we can probably lump Warley Alves and Brian Barberina in there for the sake of time. We're already at the 1 hour mark. Looking at fights, we obviously have Little Nog versus Cummins, a fight that I forgot was on this card until like a couple days ago. John Lineker, Rob Font, that'll be fun. Francisco Trinaldo versus Yancy Medeiros has the makings of a fight that should be fun. Nate Marquardt, watch out, Nate. You're 2-5 in your last 7. You might, I don't know. He definitely revived his career, his last fight with a KO victory over CB Dalloway. Thiago Santos, an interesting opponent choice here. He's won 3 in a row. The favorite here by, what are the exact odds? I'll look him up. He is the favorite, a big favorite, minus 400. Pat Cummins is minus 255 to Little Nogs, plus 215. Other pretty big favorites on the card. Sergio Moraes, big, minus 470. Trinaldo, minus 240. And Warley Alves, a huge, I think, aside from Cyborg, the biggest favorite on the card, minus 650. But the pearl of the prelims, another, at least in Vegas, one-sided affair, Damian Maia sitting at minus 325. But that should be a fun fight against Matt Brown. Brown only loses to the elite of the elite. The guy's 8-2 in his last 10. Those 2 losses coming to champions in Johnny Hendricks and Robbie Lawler. I think Damian Maia belongs in that elite of the elite group. I think his grappling is just like something this sport. It's just Fuck, man, that grappling is something to deal with. I don't think anyone can really handle it. Matt Brown included. The of course question is, can he get there to where he's totally neutralizing you? Man, Brown has good defensive wrestling, but just the way that Maia has looked recently against, I mean, his last three guys, or his last three opponents, Ryan LaFleur, Neil Magny, Gunnar Nelson, they all were on runs, man, and he put out all of those flames. I look forward to seeing him either putting forth a dominant performance or getting KO'd by Matt Brown. That's my prediction there. But I'm leaning toward the dominant performance. What do you think of the prelims before we get to those big four fights that headline the card, and then we get the hell out of here?
Well, I would be inclined to concur with you regarding the Damian Maia, Matt Brown assessment there. I certainly think that this is Damian Maia. I mean, his jiu-jitsu is second to none. There's hardly anybody aside from Chris Weidman and, I don't know, Jacare Souza, who can compete, and they're at 185 pounds. Who, of course, Damian Maia certainly was there for some time, but now he's down at 170. And as far as who can hang with his stuff at 170 pounds, it's looking like that's basically nobody. There's not a whole lot of people that can hang with Damian Maia's ground game. He is just otherworldly when it comes to that respect. Matt Brown, we know, has had some issues with the submission defense. Granted, over the past few years, actually, he's made large strides in that and really has improved his game. But there's just not a whole lot you can do when you're facing a guy like Damian Maia. For example, I want to say it was Damian Maia's first fight at 170 pounds, and he was fighting Rick Story. I thought Story had a great chance. Super heavy hands, great boxing, good wrestling background. I said, oh, he's going to be able to prevent this fight from even getting to the going to the ground. And Damian Maia comes in with this neck crank that just Rick Story's nose starts bleeding out of nowhere from some reason. Like, just the most violent neck crank submission you ever seen. Just finishing people brutally with the submissions. He's just, it doesn't really matter how good you think your grappling is. It's not shit compared to Damian Maia, as it turns out. And he just has that tool. It's super hard for anybody to contend with, except for perhaps the elite of the elite. And I mean, my goodness, we haven't seen Damian Maia in there with Robbie Lawler or Johnny Hendricks, or, you know, who else is at the top 170 pounds, Tyron Woodley. We haven't seen him at that level. So who knows if even these guys will be able to hang with his stuff. It's very curious, but yeah, this is going to be a solid scrap because, yeah, Matt Brown, certainly he shored up his game. He's done an admirable job in patching up his holes in his ground game, and he's been able to use that to great success, except for, as you mentioned, the couple setbacks he had against the aforementioned Robbie Lawler and Johnny Hendricks. But yeah, I certainly think Damian Maia is going to be able to take this one. Pat Cummins versus Little Nog. I think Cummins should be able to have that one wrapped up fairly handily. Should be a solid wrestling and ground and pound display there for Cummins. Francisco Trinaldo versus Yancy Medeiros. That should be a solid fight. Trinaldo, he's looking good these days, and Medeiros certainly still a solid prospect. And speaking of prospects, Thiago Marreta Santos, my goodness, he's been looking excellent. I want to say he's got a couple knockouts in his last few wins. Very impressive KOs. And as you mentioned, Nate Marquardt, not the most impressive himself, 2-5 in his last 7. Back at 185 after an unimpressive stint at 170 pounds in Strikeforce, as well as the UFC. Is coming off of a knockout over CB Dalloway. So, I mean, at least there is a little bit of positive momentum for him to ride coming into this one, and he will need it against the the tough Thiago Santos. But yeah, definitely a good set of prelims here leading up into a even better main card.
For sure. And the main card stacks up. We have that first fight where Warley Alves should put forth a good performance against Brian Barberino. And then we have Shogun versus Corey Anderson. I'll break it down like this. What should happen? Corey Anderson, moderate favorite, goes in there, superior wrestling, stronger, stiff punches, youth. Corey Anderson is 26? 3-fight winning streak, only 1 loss in his whole career. Goes in there, puts forth 3 good rounds, wins the fight 30-27 across the board. What do I think is going to happen? What's my pick? Corey Anderson makes a mistake, puts his chin out there a second too long. Mauricio catches him with a stiff punch, flattens him, and wins the fight via KO. I'm picking Shogun Rua. He won his last fight way back, UFC 190. I think he strings 2 in a row with this one, knocking out Corey Anderson.
Well, you know what? That could very well happen. I mean, Rua, they say the power is the last thing to go, and Rua certainly still has it. Definitely should be a more stiff test for Corey Anderson than, say, even Gian Vellante, Jan Blachowicz, Fabio Maldonado, Tom Lawler. Shogun is a far cry from those fighters, even at this advanced stage. Yeah, he is 1-2 in his last 3, but again, if Gian can knock out our boy Corey Anderson, certainly there's a good possibility for Shogun. However, as you mentioned, there are a couple factors in Beastin 25-8's favor here. Certainly, the youth on his side, but man, Shogun, he does have that veteran championship experience on the biggest stages here. This is a big jump up for Corey Anderson. In Brazil too, man, I don't know if he'll be able to do it. I think I'm gonna have to go with you, Jake, and pick Shogun Rua to get that KO going.
Taking the underdog here, upset alert. You heard it here first. The next fight, a tune-up fight in multiple senses of the word. Cyborg fighting Leslie Smith. A tune-up in the fact that, you're going to feed Cyborg an easy win before taking on opponents. And weight-wise, this is a catch weight at 140 pounds. So I guess they're trying to tune Chris down to fight at bantamweight. This is a fight between 2 women with about the same amount of fights, 15, 16 fights. One of them has won every fight except for her first fight, is on a crazy streak, and the other one is barely 500. 8-6-1 for Leslie Smith and 15-1 for Cyborg. Cyborg is going to wreck her. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I'm already looking ahead to who the UFC should schedule her for next. Give her a fun fight. Let's see a fun fight. Let's see her fight a Holly Holm or a Germaine de Randamie or a Kat Zingano, someone who really can strike with her. Cyborg has paid her dues in the sport. I don't think she really needs to work her way up. Give her this tune-up fight, and then I want to see Cyborg have a striker versus striker fight next.
Well, I'd certainly agree with just about the majority of what you said there. I hate to keep agreeing with you here, but damn it, Jake, you make so much fucking sense. Really, Leslie Smith, she is an admirable competitor and does have some decent striking, and she certainly has a ton of heart, and she's got a lot of courage here taking this fight against Cyborg. But man, I think Cyborg just has her beat in every facet of the game: the striking, the grappling, the intensity, the strength. I think she's going to have to lower center of gravity. Leslie Smith, she's a taller girl. So if Cyborg does want to get to the ground, she's going to be able to shoot in a little easier there. I just see so many advantages for Cyborg in this fight. And as you mentioned, this is 140 pounds. It's not going to be too deep of a cut for Cyborg, so that'll help as well. Not much of a cut. I mean, this is Leslie Smith being used to only cutting to 135 pounds. should be a little easier of a cut for her. So who knows? Maybe she'll have a little more pop on her punches. She'll certainly need it taking on Cyborg. But yeah, I completely agree with you. Cyborg certainly should walk through Leslie Smith in this fight. That's what she does in just about every fight she's ever had in mixed martial arts. And yeah, I think it's going to be on to a more high profile fight for her after this. I think if for the only reason she doesn't get the championship fight in her next fight, I think the UFC will book her in a 135-pound fight before it's for the bantamweight championship. Because, you can't have that 1 pound over. You can't be 136 and fight for the belt. It's got to be 135 on the nose there. So I think the UFC, if and when Cyborg is victorious at UFC 198 this Saturday, I think they're going to give her another high level, a high profile number one contenders fight at 135 pounds to give her another test cut to see if she can make the weight. And then again, if she proves victorious there, I think they'll insert her for a title fight.
And that brings us to the main event. I'm gonna make you pick first on these last two, and just so I can play devil's advocate and pick against you. The first one, a middleweight bout between Jacare Souza. He was on an 8-fight winning streak before Yoel Romero defeated him via split decision at UFC 194. Fight that I've made no bones about thinking that Jacare won. And Vitor Belfort, 5-1 in his last 5 fights. His 3-fight TRT Vitor phase, his loss to Chris Weidman, and then a win against Dan Henderson. Who are you taking here? Jacare, who's a sizable favorite at minus 320, or the Phenom, how old is this motherfucker now? The 39-year-old Vitor Belfort.
Ooh-wee. Post-TRT Vitor is not the pick I'm going with in this fight. Really, Jacare is just a beast. He's one of the only guys who can hang with Damian Maia on the ground. As we were talking about earlier, I want to say they are 1-1 in grappling matches. I'm sure one of our listeners could verify that. But he is an absolute beast, super decorated. His talent is certainly on that Damian Maia level on the ground, and he really has gotten better and better with his striking too. His hands have come together more and more. He's got a good Muay Thai clinch. He works some pretty good knees there. I think he's got Vitor beat everywhere this fight goes. We saw Vitor was good for about a minute of the Chris Weidman fight, but man, this is going to be epic. This is a dynamite fight. This is in Brazil. My goodness. But I'm taking Jacare all day long. Whether it's, I think he can knock Vitor out. I think he can submit Vitor. I think though that smart money is on Jacare submitting Vitor Belfort rather handily in the first round.
Man, I got to pick for Vitor. There's only one way I can rationalize that. And you know what way it is. Fights in Brazil.
The juice.
Back on the juice, baby. I mean, look at pictures of him. He looks a little bit puffed up again. I'm going for TRT Vitor. Stomp in here and put a mud hole in whoever you put in front of him. I don't know, man. Jacare, all jokes aside, I think would give any middleweight a run for their money, including Weidman, including Rockhold. I think he's the third best in that division behind those two guys. But you make me pick Belfort, and I will go with the drugs. He's gonna be on so much TRT. Yeah, he will be feeling the Jesus hard, and we will see TRT Vitor step in there and do what TRT Vitor does. Final fight, the main event. Fabricio Verdum, 6 straight wins since rejoining the UFC. Stipe Miocic, only 2 wins since losing to a controversial unanimous decision against Junior. Had he won that fight, he would also be on a 6-fight winning streak. Since that just question mark of a finish in Stefan Struve, Stipe Miocic, that's one of those fights where these guys run the fight 10 times, and one guy will win the fight 9 times, the other guy will win the fight once, and the one wins. I can still not believe that Stefan Struve beat Stipe Miocic a few years ago, but he did, and that is one of only 2 red marks on his career. Stipe, I think, has come a long way in the 4 years since that loss to Stefan Struve, but Fabricio Verdum, maybe the greatest heavyweight of all time. I mean, he beat Fedor. He's beat a lot of guys since. He beat Kane. He beat Travis Brown. He beat Mark Hunt. He beat Big Nog. He beat Roy Nelson. This is a very tough fight. I think this is somehow an underrated fight. I don't think Stipe gets his due, and I don't think Verdum necessarily does either because of his inactivity. He fought twice in 2012, once in 2013, twice in 2014, once in 2015. He fights 1.5 times a year, so we don't really see a lot of him. But this is a guy who's now going for his first defense at the UFC belt, even though technically I guess he won the inaugural belt the interim belt from Hunt, and then unified it against Kane. So looking for his first defense here. Does Stipe have the speed, the cardio to just what Verdum has shown recently in how to be an all-around fighter? He came into the game as a jiu-jitsu guy, and his striking has evolved so much. You watched in the Brown fight where he didn't even really need to break out the ground game. He outstruck the striker. This is one of the closest fights. Actually, it's the closest fight on the card according to Vegas. The heavyweight bout between Fabricio Verdum and Stipe Miocic. So I'm prepared to defend whoever you're picking against. UFC 198 main event for the heavyweight strap. Who you got?
Jake, this one is in Brazil. As you mentioned, Fabricio Verdum knocking on heavyweight gold status. I mean, really, you can make that argument. If he is able to beat Stipe Miocic, if he's able to beat, say, Overeem, who's a multi-time champion and also K1 kickboxing, in addition to multiple mixed martial arts promotions, if he can get a couple more wins, he can certainly usurp the title of the greatest heavyweight mixed martial artist that we've ever seen. And for that reason, among many others, I'm going to have to pick him. It's in the home country. Everything, he's firing on all cylinders. For him, relatively speaking, this isn't as long as a layoff between the Kane fight. I mean, this is about par for the course for Fabricio, if not a little sooner. So this is the time frame he's comfortable with, and man, he's got. I mean, I guess we're just nut hugging all of the grapplers. I mean, really, they have the 3 best grapplers in the UFC on this card in Fabricio Verdum, Damian Maia, and Jacare Souza. It should just be a beautiful display. Fabricio Verdum is the heavyweight version of Damian Maia and Jacare Souza, an insane ground expert, one of the best in the world to ever compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or mixed martial arts, and he's just been shoring up the striking game to go with it. We've seen him, as you mentioned, he knocked out Mark Hunt. He tuned up Travis Brown on the feet with a fantastic display. He can hang with Cain Velasquez. He beat up Cain Velasquez on the feet until Cain Velasquez's corner was saying, shoot and take him down. Which is the worst advice you could give, because almost as soon as he shot, Fabricio just snagged up that guillotine choke like it was nothing and put Kane out. He's beasting everywhere. Miocic is fantastic, a great competitor in this fight, but I've certainly got to go with the home country favorite in this one in Fabricio Verdum.
Yeah, and they share a lot of similarities on their record. Both recently defeated Mark Hunt. I've talked about how I don't want to give too much bias to their most recent fight, but Fabricio Verdum had some very sloppy looking moments against Kane. Both of them were dragging hard, and I think a fight you look at like Stipe Miocic against Junior Dos Santos, neither of those guys were really dragging much. Both of those guys were throwing a lot of offense. I think just looking at fights like that are real drawn out, and that's what I think is going to happen here. I think Stipe is going to have the slight cardio edge. He's got the reach. He has an 80-inch reach. I believe Fabricio is at like 76, 77. I think Stipe takes the belt here. Stipe just... His striking, I think, is going to be too much for Fabricio, and I think he is going to have the tools to keep the fight standing up. If it goes to the mat, it's all over, people. And I think that might be something Fabricio tries to go to if he's getting outstruck. But Stipe does have that wrestling background. I think his wrestling is good enough to keep the fight where he wants to keep it. And I am picking the Ohioan Stipe Miocic to claim the UFC heavyweight belt. And I believe that's all we got, Pat. You have anything for the people before we send it out?
Man, you know what, Jake? It's always a pleasure getting together with you, crushing it on the mic, giving the people the dose of MMA news and breakdowns and insights that they need. We gave them a couple underdogs, let them know what's good in the streets, and we're looking forward to coming back next week. Same bad time, same bad channel, and letting everybody know how correct we were with our predictions for UFC 198.
Very correct. Yeah, I don't have any new news for next week. Plan it to be Wednesday night, sometime between 30 and 45 minutes after UFC tonight ends. I guess we've been hitting it. I think we went about an hour this time. But yeah, enjoy the weekend's fights. Bellator 154, UFC 198. They should be good. We'll be back next week. As always, Twitter, The MMA Podcast. Visit themapodcast.com. Links at the top to subscribe. Until then, we gone.
I got coke and weed sex, go broke, I be back so quick. Watch how I react to that. Call up a batch, roll some scratch, bring it straight to the track. See I'm a Max /pimp/hustler, baby. I ain't a killer, but got niggas that'll bust your lady.